What are tariffs? A tariff is like a tax that one country puts on goods, on things like toys, clothes, food, cars that are made in other countries. For example, if the United States buy toys from China, the US government can change tax on those toys. This tax makes the toys more expensive for people in the US to buy. The reason countries put tariffs on things is often to protect their own businesses from competition. Why does the US use tariffs? The US use tariffs to protect American businesses from companies in other countries that can make products cheaper. For example, if China makes toys really cheap, people in the US might buy Chinese toys instead of toys made in the US. To make sure that doesn't happen too much, the US might add a tariff, which makes Chinese toys more expensive. Another reason the US uses tariffs is to get other countries to treat the US fairly. For example, if another country has tariffs on US goods, the US might add its own tariffs in return. It's like a way of saying, if you're going to put taxes on our stuff, we will do the same to you. How tariffs affect the world economy. Effects on prices and trade. When the US put tariffs on products from another country, the people in the US have to pay more for those products. This makes it harder for American families to afford things like toys, clothes, or electronics. But it's not just the US that feels the impact. Countries that sell things to the US might have problems too. If the US put a tariff on Chinese toys, for example, China might not be able to sell as many toys to the US. This means China will lose money. In return, China might add its own tariffs on US products, making it more expensive for people in China to buy things from the US, like cars or airplanes. This back and forth of tariffs between countries is called a trade war, which is currently happening. Trade wars can be harmful because they make products more expensive and slow down businesses between countries. How countries respond to US tariffs. China is one of the biggest countries that the US has put tariffs on. When the US added tariffs on Chinese goods, China fought back. China put its own tariffs on US products like soybeans and cars. For example, farmers in the US who grow soybeans had a harder time selling their crops to China because of the tariffs. As a result, many American farmers lost money. China also looked for other countries to buy their products from instead of the US. This hurt the US economy in certain industry. Mexico responds to US adding tariffs. Mexico is another country that felt the effect of US tariff, especially when it came to goods like cars and electronics. In response, Mexico started to focus more on trading with other countries like Canada and the European Union. Mexico also made its own tariffs on US products. For example, when the US added a tariff on Mexican steel, Mexico responded by adding tariffs on things like US pork and apples. This kind of back and forth tariffs hurt businesses in both countries. Canada responds to US tariffs. Canada is also a close ally to US and it has a lot of trade with the US, especially in industry like farming, cars, and wood. When the US added tariffs to Canada's steel and aluminium, Canada decided to fight back. Canada added tariffs on US goods like ketchup, yogurt, and whiskey. This made it more expensive for Canadians to buy American products, and it hurts US businesses that sell these things to Canada. The US and Canada eventually worked out an agreement to reduce the tariffs. But the situation showed how tariffs can affect trade between even friendly countries. How the European Union is responding to US tariffs. The European Union is a group of countries in Europe that trade a lot with the US. When the US added tariffs on steel and aluminium from Europe, the European Union responded by putting tariffs on US products like jeans, motorcycles, and even bourbon whiskey. The European Union was upset because the tariffs made European businesses lose money. Like Canada and Mexico, the European Union also looked for ways to trade more with other countries and lessen its independence on the US. Japan responds to US tariffs. Japan also face US tariffs, especially in the car industry. Japan makes a lot of cars that are sold in the US. But when the US added tariffs on Japanese cars, it made things harder for Japanese car companies. Japan fought back by arguing that the US should not charge extra tariffs on cars because Japan cars were helping American consumers get good deals. Japan also started working more with countries like China and European Union, hoping to make up for some of the lost businesses with the US. As a result of the US tariffs, it has also made Japan and China and South Korea to work together in retaliation to US tariffs. How tariffs affect people around the world. Higher prices when the countries add tariffs. It usually makes things more expensive. For example, if China has to pay a tariff to send toys to the US, the price of the toys might go up. People in the US have to pay more for toys, and the people in China might lose money if they can't sell as many toys. This means families in both countries could find it harder to buy what they need. Farmers, factories, workers, and small businesses might also lose their jobs if they can't sell their products because of tariffs. It can also lead to loss of jobs. When companies in one country can't sell their goods in another country because of tariffs, they might have to lay off workers. For example, US car companies might sell fewer cars to China if China put tariffs on American cars. The car company might have to let workers go because they aren't making money enough, and so they have to lay off the workers. Tariffs can lead to global tension. When countries put tariffs on each other, it can create tension, as what is currently happening in the world. Countries might stop trusting each other or might stop cooperating on other important issues like climate change or security. This can make the world a less peaceful place. Recent news about tariffs and trade wars in the world. China and the US in the year 2024, they were still in discussion about trade between China and the US. While the two countries didn't completely stop their tariffs, they did try to reach new agreements to make things easier for businesses. The trade war between these two big countries has slowed down a bit, but the effects of the tariffs are still being felt in many industry, especially currently right now, the year 2025. We have seen USA adding tariffs to countries like China, Europe, Canada, Mexico, and in retaliation, China, Japan, South Korea have decided to work together in retaliating against US tariffs. And also, China recently has added tariffs to American goods by 34% in retaliation to what the current president of America has implemented. So, currently in the world, there is a trade war which is continuing and is going to affect many people and many businesses across the world. US and European Union. The US and the European Union have been working together to reduce tariffs. They've been trying to find ways to make trade easier, but there are still some disagreements. The European Union is especially focused on making sure that the US tariffs don't hurt European businesses too much, especially in industries like farming and technology. Mexico and Canada in retaliating against the US tariffs. Mexico and Canada have worked closely together to deal with US tariffs. They have tried to support each other by creating trade deals that make it easier for them to trade within North America. The three countries signed a new deal called the USMCA, which stands for United States Mexico Canada Agreement, to replace the old NAFTA agreement. This deal aimed to make trade fairer and reduce some of the problems caused by tariffs. How tariffs impact different industries. In agriculture and farming, agriculture is also affected by tariffs. Agriculture is one of the sectors that gets hit hard by tariffs. Many countries like the US and China rely on farming to produce food and sell it to other countries. When tariffs are added to agriculture products like soybeans, wheat, or meat, it can make those products more expensive. For example, US soybeans farmers were greatly affected by tariffs during the trade war with China. China used to buy a lot of soybeans from the US, but when the US added tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded with tariffs of its own, making US soybeans more expensive for Chinese buyers. As a result, US farmers lost a major market for their products. To cope, many US farmers had to look for other countries to sell to, but it wasn't always enough to make up for the loss. Automobiles and car industry sector is also going to be affected. The car industry is another sector that faces serious challenges due to tariffs. Both the US and other countries like Japan, Germany, and South Korea are major players in the global car market. When the US imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium, it made it more expensive for car manufacturers to produce vehicles. Countries like Japan, which export many cars to the US, were impacted. Japanese automakers such as Toyota and Honda were forced to decide whether to absorb the added cost of the tariffs or to raise the price of their cars. Some of them opened more factories in the US to produce cars locally, avoiding tariffs and saving money. Also, the technology sector and the electronic sector is going to be affected with tariffs. The technology sector, including companies that make smartphones, computers, and other electronics, is also vulnerable to tariff. China, in particular, is a major producer of electronics. When the US placed tariffs on Chinese-made electronics, it raised the price of things like smartphones and computers in the US. For instance, Apple, which assembles many of its products in China, could see higher costs because of tariffs on components that are made in China and shipped to the US. If Apple raises the price of its products to cover the cost of these tariffs, US consumers might have to pay more. This situation also affects consumers around the world who may face higher prices for electronics as a result. How tariffs affect workers. It can result to job losses. One of the most significant effects of tariffs is the loss of jobs. When countries impose tariffs on products, companies may lose customers in other countries, causing them to lay off workers or reduce production.
Power. It's about 520 million of American livelihoods thrown into chaos. This isn't just a trade dispute. This is a strategic blow aimed at the heart of U.S. economic interests.
When
And
the
while
US
Washington scrambles
imposed
to pick up the
tariffs on
pieces,
China goods,
there's one player who didn't
many
miss their
American
chance:
manufacturers
Moscow,
that relied on
sliding
Chinese
into the
made
void
parts
without so much as
saw
a
their
knock on the
costs go
door.
up.
But why did
Some
China turn its back on the
companies,
US so
unable to absorb
abruptly?
the extra
And why is
costs,
Russia,
either
of all
shut
countries,
down
the one to
or
benefit
move
the
their
most?
production
The
to
answer
other
is more
countries
complex and more
with lower
dangerous than you might
tariffs.
think. According to
It can
Reuters,
lead to
China's
strain on
rejection of
small
US beef followed a
businesses.
covert series of
Tariffs
inspections at key ports
are
in
bad for
Guangdong and
small
Shanghai,
businesses.
just 2 days
Small
after the
businesses are
United States
often
imposed
hit harder
harsh
by
tariffs on
tariffs.
Chinese electric
Large
vehicles.
companies
Officially,
may have
China
the
blamed health
resources to
standards for the
absorb the
ban,
cost of
but
higher
analysts
tariffs,
at the Peterson
but
Institute
small
and Rabobank
companies
believe it's
might
something
not.
far more
A small
strategic:
business that
retaliation.
imports
You don't
goods
throw
from
away because
another
this is
country
personal.
could
The
face
fallout from China's
steep
decision
price
wasn't just
increase
financial,
if
it
tariffs
was
are
deeply human.
imposed.
Over
These
$520
businesses
million
may have to
in
raise
orders have been
prices to
canceled or diverted in the
consumers,
last 2
which
weeks,
could
according
reduce
to the U.S. Department of
sales or even
Agriculture.
close down
Ranchers in Texas,
altogether
Kansas,
if
and
they
Nebraska,
cannot
who produce over
afford higher
70% of the
costs.
U.S. beef exported to China, are left
Farming
with
and
full
rural
inventories
communities will
and no
also be
buyers.
affected
Clayton Ree, a
by
Nebraska cattle producer,
tariffs.
is now staring down a
Farmers
$14 million
are
contract in
particularly
limbo.
vulnerable
We
in the
prepared
case
shipments
of
for
tariffs.
Q2 based on
Many
projections from
farmers in the
January,
US and
he
other
said in an
countries
interview with the
rely
Wall
on
Street
selling
Journal.
their products
Now,
to
we're selling at a
international
loss to
markets.
domestic
When
buyers
tariffs
who
are
won't even
placed on
touch those
agricultural
volumes.
goods,
The
farmers
USDA was
often
our growth
see their
frontier,
income
said
drop.
Ethan Lane,
This
president
can
of the
lead
American
to job
Cattlemen's
losses in
Association.
rural communities
Losing them throws
where
years of
agriculture
investment off
is a
course.
major source
But
of
it's not just ranchers who are
employment.
feeling the blow.
For
Downstream
example,
industries, feed
in
suppliers, truckers, cold chain
2018,
logistics are facing
US
layoffs.
soybeans
The
farmers
ripple effect is
lost billions of
devastating,
dollars
and
in
it's only the
sales
beginning.
to China
But here's
because
where
of
it gets even
tariffs.
more chilling.
To help
This
support
wasn't
these
just a
farmers,
sudden,
the US
arbitrary action.
government
This was a
provided
political
subsidies
strike.
or
The roots of this
financial
escalation
assistance.
stretch back to
However,
February
this
2025,
didn't
when
fully
President
solve
Trump,
the
in his
problem,
second term,
and many
imposed
farmers
25%
still
tariffs on
struggle.
$38 billion worth of Chinese
Global
electric
response
vehicles,
to US
batteries,
tariffs.
and rare earth components.
China
Citing
strategy.
national security concerns and
They are
unfair
going to
competition,
diversify
Trump
their
took aim at
trade.
China's technological
China's
ambitions.
response to US
Beijing wasted
tariffs
no time
has been
retaliating.
to seek
With
out
end of
new trade
enforcement, it was a
partners and
calculated
markets.
campaign.
For
A
example,
spokesperson for
China
China's
has
Ministry of
increased its
Commerce
trade
stated,
with Africa,
"Imports
Latin
must meet
America,
our safety
and
standards,
Southeast
regardless
Asia.
of origin."
In this region, China
But
has
in the
been
background,
able to
state
sell
media
products
published
at
op-eds
competitive
linking
prices,
agricultural
even
dependence to
when there's
geopolitical
enforcing tariffs in
vulnerability,
the US.
positioning American
China
agriculture
has
as a
also
critical
worked on
weakness.
agreements
Wendy
to
Cutler,
reduce
vice
tariffs and
president at the
increase
Asia
trade
Society
with other
Policy
countries.
Institute,
For
put it
example,
bluntly.
China
Trump hits their
signed
tech,
a
they
regional
hit his voter
comprehensive
base.
economic
With farm
partnership
states
with
playing a
15
crucial role
countries
in Trump's
in the
re-election
Asia
bid,
Pacific
China's
region,
move was as
including
strategic as it was
Japan,
personal.
South Korea,
They weren't just
and
retaliating,
Australia.
they were
This
sending a message to
agreement
both
will
Washington
reduce
and American
tariffs between
farmers.
these
If you hit
countries,
us,
and
we'll
China
hit where it
hopes
hurts
it
the
will
most.
help
But as the
replace
US
some of the
bleeds,
lost trade
Russia is
with
swooping
the
in,
US.
taking full advantage of the vacuum China's
Mexico
created.
moves to strengthen
Russia's beef
regional
exports to
trade as a
China
result
surged
of
by
tariffs.
312% in the first quarter of
Mexico, which
2025,
shares a
reaching
long
38,000
border with the
tons,
US,
more than
has
5
had
times the
to
amount in the
respond
same
to
quarter in
tariffs by
2022,
strengthening its
according to
trade
China's General
relationship
Administration of
with other
Customs.
countries,
How did they move so quickly to fill the gap
Canada
left by the
and the
US?
European
In
Union.
2023,
The
Russia and China
United
signed a
States
bilateral
Mexico
agreement to
Canada
establish a
agreement
joint
was
veterinary
created
certification
to
system,
replace the
paving the way for
NAFTA,
exports from 40 Russian
which
processing
stands
plants
for
previously
North
banned from the
America
Chinese
Free Trade
market.
Agreement.
In November
The new deal
2024,
aims to make
a rail
trade
corridor
between
linking Russia's
these two
Volgograd
countries
region to
easier
Xinjiang
by
opened under
reducing
China's Belt
tariffs
and Road
and
Initiative,
addressing other
slashing
issues
transport
that are
times by
causing
2/3.
tension.
This is no accident, says Alexei Kurtikov,
European
Russia's
Union
deputy
tax
minister of
stance in
agriculture.
retaliation
This is a
to
result of
tariffs.
strategic
The
alignment and
European
infrastructure
Union
diplomacy.
responded to US
But it's
tariffs
more
by
than just
implementing
logistics.
tariffs on
Russia is
American
using the
goods
yuan
like
ruble payment system to
motorcycles,
sidestep the
gin,
risks of
and
dollar
bourbon
transactions,
whiskey.
a key sticking
The
point in
EU
US-China
has
trade.
been vocal in
Moscow
its
isn't just filling a gap. They're
US
capitalizing on a strategic
arguing that
opportunity.
the US
The truth
is
is,
using
Russia didn't just
unfair
slip into China's agricultural market.
protectionist
They were
measures
invited.
to hurt
They waltzed through a
European
door left
businesses.
wide open by American
However,
tariffs and
the
trade
EU
policies.
is also
Now
trying
the
to
question
avoid
isn't
a
just how
full-blown
fast Russia
trade
is
war
moving.
with the US
It's whether they can
and
keep up
has
with China's
worked
massive
to
insatiable
negotiate better
appetite
terms
for
for
beef.
trade.
Can
For
Russia
instance,
supply the
in
quantity and
2020,
quality
the
that China
US and the
demands?
EU
And more
agreed
importantly,
to a
will the
limited
US be
deal
able
that
to reclaim
aimed
its
to
place at the
reduce
table before
tariffs
Russia
on certain
solidifies
goods
its position.
wine
This isn't
and
just about
cheese.
beef. It's about global power, economic dominance, and the shifting balance of geopolitical
They
forces. The game has changed. and the
Japan
stakes have never
efforts
been
to
higher.
protect its
In
economy.
2024, China consumed an
Japan also
eye-popping
has been affected
10.6
by
million
tariffs.
tons of beef, according to the
Japan
OECD FAO
depends heavily
Agricultural
on
Outlook.
export,
Nearly
especially in the
25% of that
automobile
came from
and
imports, with the
technology
United
sector.
States once dominating this
Has
trade.
also been
Last
affected
year,
by
however, the
US
U.S.
tariffs.
filled a mere
Japan has worked a free
285,000
trade
tons,
agreement with
while
countries
Russia,
outside
despite
the US
its
to
rapid
reduce
expansion,
its
accounted
reliance
for
on
barely
American
15%
trade.
of that volume.
One of the
So how is
significant
Russia planning to
agreements
close the
Japan
gap?
signed was the
And what does this
Japan
mean for the
EU
future of
trade
global food
agreement
trade?
in the
In
year
early 2025, the Russian
which
government made an
eliminates
aggressive
tariffs on a
move,
range of products
announcing a
and
staggering
services.
$1.1
This
billion
agreement helps
subsidy
Japan
to double
maintain
its meat
its
production
trade
by
relationship with
2027,
EU
with a
and
specific
cushion
focus
the
on
impact
export-oriented
of
beef
US
farms.
tariffs.
To achieve
The
this,
other
3
role
massive
of
new feedlots are being
other
constructed in
countries
Voron and
responding to
Kursk,
the US
each
tariffs,
capable of raising over
the
100,000
developing
cattle
world
annually.
countries like Africa,
Russia, with
Latin
its vast
America,
swaths
and
of arable
Southeast
land,
Asia
cheap
are
labor,
watching the
and newly
US-China
improved
trade war
logistics,
closely
is poised for a leap
because
forward.
it affects their
But it's
trade
more than just a
routes.
business strategy.
Many of
It's a
these countries
geopolitical
are hoping
maneuver.
to benefit
Olga
from the
Ova,
tension
a trade
between the
economist
two
at Moscow
economic
State
giants
University,
by
notes that
increasing
while
their
Russia's logistical
exports to
advantages
the
are
US
undeniable,
or China.
the world
For
remains
example,
wary of its safety
Vietnam
standards
and
and the
India have
reliability
seen
of
an
its cold
increase
chain
in exports to
infrastructure.
the US
And yet China
as-
appears to be
as-
willing to
as
overlook these
compared
risks,
to,
likely for the sake of deeper, more strategic
before.
geopolitical ties. But the
US
burning question
companies right
remains,
now, they
why
are
is China pivoting so
getting
radically toward
goods,
Russia?
products from
Argentina,
India.
once China's second largest beef
China-
supplier,
and they're
accounted
trying
for
to
21% of
avoid,
China's beef
getting
imports in
tariffs from
2021.
China.
But in late
These
2024,
countries have
Argentina's political and
positioned
economic
themselves as
instability hit a
low-cost
tipping
alternatives
point.
to China,
Javier Milei's
especially
deregulation
in
agenda led to
industries
runaway
like
inflation,
electronics,
a spiraling
textiles,
peso,
and
delayed
furniture.
export permits, and halted
So,
contracts.
what are the long-term
once
effects
reliable
of
supplier
tariffs
was now
on
in
global
turmoil,
trade?
making it an unpredictable and volatile option for
One,
China.
slower
Meanwhile,
economic
Australia,
growth. One
long a
of the
trusted
long-term
partner, has
effects
struggled to
of
regain
widespread
Beijing's trust
tariffs
after the
is that
2020
they can
barley and
slow
wine
down
dispute.
economic
While
growth.
China lifted some bans on
When
Australian
countries
beef in late
increase tariffs, the
2023,
cost of
the
doing
relationship
business
remained
goes
fraught.
up.
In
And that
January
can discourage
2025, 3
investment.
major Australian
This means
shipments
that
were rejected
business
for exceeding
might
microbial
not
residue
expand
limits,
as quickly
rekindling
and people
Beijing's
may not
doubts.
buy as much
Trust has not
because
been fully
prices
restored,
are higher.
says Dr. Vivian
For
Wang, a
example,
food safety policy analyst
the
at the
World Bank
University
has
of Sydney.
estimated that
China now
global
places greater
GDP
value on suppliers who offer not
could
only
be
volume,
reduced by 1%
but political
if
alignment
countries
and sanitary
continue to
compliance.
engage in trade wars.
Enter
This
Russia,
could lead
once
to
an unlikely
fewer jobs
contender,
and lower
now stepping up as
wages
China's beef
around the
supplier of the
world.
future. By the first quarter of 2025,
Supply
China's
chain
imports of Russian beef
disruption.
soared to 41,000
Global
tons,
supply chains
up dramatically
are
from
networks
just
that businesses use to
9,800
get
tons
parts
during
and
the same
materials
period
from
in
all over the
2023.
world. Tariffs
According to
can
the General
disrupt these
Administration of
supply
Customs,
chains because
what's driving
companies
this?
may
Price
have
is
to
part of the
find new
story.
suppliers
Russian beef
or
is
pay
12%
higher
cheaper
prices.
than Australian
For
beef,
example,
but there's more.
a
The
car
real game
company in
changer
the
is
US
Russia's
that
alignment
gets
with
parts
China's
from
payment
China
system.
may face
Since
delays
December
or extra
2024,
costs
89%
because
of Russian
tariffs.
beef exports
In
to
the
China
long
have been
run,
transacted in yuan
businesses
or
may choose
rubles,
to
bypassing the
reshuffle
US
their
dollar
supply
entirely.
chains,
Beijing
moving
values
production to
predictability over
countries with
perfection,
fewer tariffs
says Maxim
or
Sokolov,
lower
CEO of
costs.
Russia's
This could
agro-export
shift
group
the global
TAS.
manufacturing
This strategic
landscape
alignment is
and
not just a
lead to
win
the
for
rise-
Russia. It's a
to the rise of
decisive
new
pivot in the
industries
broader
in places
geopolitical
that were
landscape.
previously less
Russia's new
involved in
agricultural rail
international trade.
corridor,
And this is
operational
what we're
since November
experiencing
2024,
currently
has
in the
slashed
year
shipping times to China
2025.
from 28 days by sea
In
to just 11
conclusion,
days by rail,
the future of
drastically
tariffs
improving
and
efficiency and
global trade
predictability. This shift
is
isn't simply
uncertain.
about beef, it's a
Tariffs
dramatic
are a
reimagining
powerful
of
tool
global
that
trade
countries use
dynamics,
to protect
cloaked in the
their
veneer of
industries and
agricultural
promote
exchange.
their own
And the
economies.
consequences could reshape the
However,
global
they
food
come with
market.
risks,
On March
higher
7,
prices,
2025,
job losses,
China
and
escalated
strained
tensions with the
international
U.S.,
relationships.
imposing new
The
tariffs
US
on 7
has
and
used
11 U.S.
tariffs to push
agricultural
for fair
products,
trade.
including sorghum,
But
almonds,
these
pork,
actions have
and dairy.
sparked responses
The
from
tariffs,
countries like
totaling
China,
$11.6
Mexico,
billion in
Canada,
annual trade,
the
came
European
just
Union,
days after the U.S.
Japan,
reinstated
and
tariffs on
others,
$35
leading
billion
to
worth
a
of
wave of
Chinese tech
tariffs
goods.
and
This is
retaliation.
not just economic
In the
retaliation,
future,
it's a
the
strategic
hope is
maneuver.
that countries will
USDA
work
chief
together to
economist
find
Seth
ways
Meyer
to
warned
make
that if
trade
these retaliatory
fairer
measures
without
persist,
relying on
U.S.
tariffs.
soybean
As
exports,
countries
valued
try
at
to
$14
recover
billion
from the
in
economic effects of
2024,
tariffs,
could drop by
there will
22%
likely
in
be more
2025.
effort
This is no
to
longer a
reform
simple tit for
global
tat,
trade rules,
says Alicia
making
Garcia
them
Herrera,
more
chief Asia
open
Pacific
and
economist at
transparent.
Natixis.
The
It's a
trade
long-term
wars
decoupling.
may continue
These tariffs
to evolve,
represent
but
far
one
more than
thing
just
is
economic
clearer.
punishment.
The world
They are an attempt to
economies
fracture the
are
U.S.-China
more
relationship,
interconnected
strategically
than
targeting
ever,
red
and
state
decisions
exports to
made
put
by
political
one
pressure on
country
rural
can
America while
ripple
avoiding
across
critical
the
inputs
globe,
like lithium or
affecting
semiconductors.
people
It's a
and
calculated
businesses
move,
everywhere,
designed to disrupt
and
the
is
U.S.'s
currently what we're
agricultural dominance,
experiencing
and the
in the
stakes
year
are higher than they appear.
2025.
The US's
Tariffs
share of China's
lead
beef
to
market,
trade war,
once a major
and
driver of agricultural
yes, it leads
exports,
to
has
job
plummeted.
losses
In 2022,
and
the US
economic
held 12.6% of
growth,
China's
which is slow.